Are you truly ready for this exciting and fantastic draw that will help us understand and discover our next opponent in the March playoffs? We will find out whether we'll play the second match at home or not. There will be an exciting draw coming up, and we'll toss a coin up into the air. Then you will make your choice just as the experts have guided you, choosing those to avoid, like Sweden, for example, which is known to be a particularly tough opponent. Romania, the weak ones, the easy ones. I think this is the right way to look at it for us. We are capable of beating a strong national team, and we are also capable of losing to a team thrown together in 5 minutes. So it won't depend on the others, but on us. And then there's this pathetic search for training camps, after the schedule has already been set a certain way. Clearly, those who made the schedule, those who set the dates, thought we would easily qualify for the World Cup. But after the defeat in Oslo, there wasn't much left to think about, so now we're all on Gravina's bandwagon, who says that making the playoffs is an achievement of an objective. We've achieved our goal, right? That's what Gravina said, so I suppose I must not have actually been born in Italy, but perhaps somewhere else, where making the World Cup playoffs is still considered the main goal. Luckily, the league is starting up again, and thankfully we can leave behind all these, in my opinion, pointless discussions, all this chatter, all these interpretations just to protect one's own seat. We'll have a great feast, a great menu starting already on Saturday with some important matches. I'll pick two. Obviously, Fiorentina-Juventus at 6 p.m. and then Napoli-Atalanta at 8:45 p.m. We'll go all the way to the derby on Sunday evening, a significant derby. In this video, I'll tell you a few things also related to the transfer market. I'll clear up some situations that I think have been blown out of proportion too quickly without any real basis. And I'll also talk about who, from my point of view, is currently irreplaceable at Napoli. His absence will be significant and it will be difficult to replace him in the best possible way. In the meantime, let's look at Juventus. What do I expect? I expect Spalletti to play with a back four, which is a defensive line consisting of 4 players, to go with that well-known and widely used 4-3-3 formation as he had hinted at before the break following the draw against Torino, which had been a closely contested and hard-fought match resulting in a stalemate on the scoreboard. Some positives but also several negatives, so I expect the 4-3-3. From this moment on, I expect a Juventus reminiscent of Spalletti's style. I expect a consistent Juventus. I expect a Juventus that earns a lot of points. I expect a Juventus that, of course, will then go to Norway next week to try to get their Champions League situation back on track, and I'm curious to see, with the return to a back four and while waiting for Bremer, what will become of these Cup miners. Similar to what he did with Calafiori, more or less, meaning that Spalletti once again decides to play the Dutchman, who was brought in to be a midfielder, a mezzala, or at most to play a bit further forward, and he's the one who's supposed to bring clarity to the play with his sweet velvety touch. And it's a move that, at first, took him out of the dishwasher, actually out of the washing machine. And Koop Miners, who was coming off some dreadful performances, being shuffled from right to left. So the 4-3-3 with Koop Miners in the Calafiori role, free to build up play, waiting for Bremer, and especially trying to understand what will happen with Bremer, whether Koop Miners will always play alongside him, or if this apprenticeship, which is already bearing fruit, will eventually lead Koop Miners to play in his own position, or rather, exactly where Spalletti sees him, and as he explained in the press conference. When it comes to the transfer market, I respect everyone, but let me give you a humble piece of advice. Avoid making lists of names now, as unfortunately happens every November, and even up until December 10th every year, because luckily we're not here because we have to sell at all costs. A newspaper or chase clicks by throwing out names. There are some names that, realistically, Juve has followed in the past, but who are now in a much more complicated situation. They sell them to you as names about to arrive, on the verge of signing, for example, Xhaka. Xhaka is a midfielder that both Milan and Juve followed last summer without ever making a decisive move, even though there were very favorable conditions to do so. You could have bought his contract for a reasonable fee, but you decided to wait. Milan probably because they had signed Modric and wanted a midfielder with different characteristics. Juventus because they focused on the attack. Now we're talking about a player who is happy at Sunderland, and in any case you would need a lot of money. It doesn't seem to me that Juve can invest that much money in a player who is no longer so young, considering what they think over there, unless things change. Well, but this whole saga just to get certain names into people's heads that today have no real substance, in my opinion, is pointless. Juve will decide later what to do. As always, they're following some young prospects, their scouting is active, they still need to appoint and officially announce a sporting director, which they don't have yet. So there's still a bit of confusion. And up front, you have to make some choices, knowing that by postponing the Vlahovic situation until June, you basically allow others to step in and possibly make an offer in a few months that Vlahovic himself might like. But I expect that Openda, Zagrova, and Jonathan David won't be treated as slackers or as if they're no good, especially considering there are so many commitments. With back-to-back matches where Juventus will be in the spotlight, the transfer market is just getting started now with the first ideas, like the one from Verona and Baldanzi, which had actually been finalized. This idea came up in the last days of August, but then Roma didn't sign the attacking winger and Baldanzi stayed. Now Baldanzi could become very relevant again. As I mentioned and discussed on my channels a few days ago, reiterating it. But as for all the other things, maybe we need to check them calmly now. Regarding Fratesi and Pellegrini, I don't have any major updates because they are important players for important clubs. As for Luis Enrique, who isn't making much of an impact, I wouldn't make a big deal out of it. It's true that Inter had planned for his arrival well in advance, but in the transition from a purely offensive phase to another phase that also needs to include a defensive approach, I think it takes some time and patience. I wouldn't dramatize the situation too much. In my opinion, the real big problem is with Napoli, but not in the transfer market, because now you have to make choices and carry out some operations, but rather on the pitch right now. I think that if someone asked me if there is an irreplaceable player at Napoli, maybe I would come up with two names, but the first of those two would be Frank Anguissa, because to me, he is irreplaceable. To me, he's a midfielder I've praised many times, and today, on a European scale, he's among the top 3, 4, 5, or 6. Let's not go any lower than that, considering his performance, how much he's improved, how well he's internalized the team's tactics, how he started scoring goals with a certain consistency, providing assists and being present, especially when he pushes forward and gets into the box. He creates openings for opponents or scores himself, and he scores beautiful goals. For me, Anguissa is replaceable. So Napoli needs to find solutions, alternative paths, shortcuts to get through this phase alive. I repeat, I'm a big admirer of De Bruyne. But between De Bruyne and Anguissa, if you ask me who has a bigger impact, from my point of view, Anguissa's absence weighs at least 30 to 40% more. There's the Tour de Force period coming up because you'll have so many commitments. Good luck, but actions are what matter. We'll see if this ongoing saga with Conte and the team will actually bring something concrete. The first test is significant, but for me, there's one irreplaceable player, and that's Anguissa. Then we'll see what the results on the field are. I'm also looking forward to your opinions, and I send you all a hug.